Hudal got Eichmann away.
Bishop
Hudal. Alois, I think his name was. Bishop Alois Hudal, who worked in Rome, gave them Red Cross passports to get them away to South America. Eichmann, Mengele, Stangl, quite a few, and many that we don't know of. You know, because even the Germans tried to. They all the Operation Reinhardt personnel were taken to Trieste fighting the partisans, where Himmler and the SS thought, well, they'll get killed by the partisans. Many did. Globlochnik was killed. Wirth was killed. You know, that solves the problem. They're buried with full military honors. You know, these monsters. They were trying to get rid of them. You know, and Stangl, Franz Stangl, who was the commandant of Treblinka, he was under no illusion that they were being got rid of, in the same way that they got rid of the Sonderkommando. You know, they liquidated anybody who survived to the end when they were closing the camps down. The Sonderkommando were the Jewish prisoners who were forced to survive another day to pick up the corpses, take the corpses out of the gas chambers and burn them. And there's some incredible characters that survived. There's one man called Philipp Müller, who's interviewed in Shoah. Extraordinary man. And he survived 5 Sonderkommando liquidations and then was put on a death march. Any Sonderkommando? No, it didn't say it. And he survived. But that man was a Sonderkommando for like 3 years or something in Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. And I think he tells the story in Shoah, once he'd had enough. They'd do things like they'd see people from their town, and he went into the gas chamber with them. He said, I've had enough. And they turned around and said, no, you have to bear witness. You have a chance to survive, however thin. I mean, it was no chance at all, but he did. He did. It's an extraordinary man. Some of those characters that did, like of the 67 that survived Treblinka, there's a man called Richard Glaser. Extraordinary man. He bore witness. He stood in the dock and said, he did this, he did that, this. Monsters. People like Kurt Franz, who murdered just in a bestial fashion. I mean, absolute monster. A cook before the war, given a uniform, programmed. A cook after the war. 65, I did nothing, I tried to help those poor people. But 67 of them said, no, you didn't. You murdered and murdered and murdered. He would just take out a gun, a shotgun, and shoot somebody in the backside to see how long it took. Oh, just horrific. The stories are just very, very painful. And then, we'd got off we were going to talk about the banality of evil. Well, where it becomes banal is that ultimately it becomes a job, and you get used to anything.
Yes.
And they got used to 15,000 people a day. But Sukamel said, but we were up night and day. We had to work through the night. Poor sod, But, a very primitive but efficient factory of death.
I think that's part of where the banality comes.
That's banal.
Yeah, that's that total sort of systemic approach to something that should not be at all systemic. I mean, the comprehension to you and
but you wouldn't be able to do it without.
Exactly. Well, that's what happens with the Einsack group, wasn't it? Is they had moved.
All doctors, by the way. Every one of the commanders were doctors.
Really?
One of them was medical and philosophy. He was doctor. And working out how to save bullets by shooting a mother and child with one bullet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. These normal, ordinary men. There's a great book by Christopher Browning, the American historian, called Ordinary Men. These people from Hamburg. And they were butchers, they were butchers. I don't mean that in a comical sense. Greengrocers, postmen, pub landlords. And they were taken to Poland, and tomorrow you've got to shoot 1,500 people, men, women, and children. I think 9 stood out. 9 said, I can't do that. 600 did it. And some of them got so used to it, they started to enjoy their work.
Have you looked into the rape of Nanking?
No.
The rape of Nanking was where the Japanese imperial force marched through China and stopped off in Nanking, and they subjected the people of Nanking to all forms of torture, rape, murder, and there's a prevalent theme there of people. They would throw babies into the air and see who could cut them in half with katanas. They made fun out of the most wicked of nature, and that is a consistent theme.
Bestial.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's. I think evil as a subject is going to be a big part of this conversation, but I think the thing that I think you and I share here of sort of not being able to wrap your head around how your mind could ever get to a place where you think, I'm going to throw that baby in the air and see whether I can cut it in half. You and I, from the comfort of these chairs, cannot understand that perspective. Now, there is a lot of nuance to the point, because there just is. It's the nature of the point of where someone's come from, what they've been taught. I mean, the Japanese were notorious for being horrendously racist to everyone but the Japanese.
The British.
Yeah, you know. I mean,
there's no difference between the, the skeletons, walking skeletons at Belsen, and in the Japanese concentration camp.
Yes, they were wicked.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the thing that I find hard to come to terms with, is how that becomes that banal, just standard procedure. But a question that I'd like to sort of broach as to get into that point is, do you think that all of the people who worked somewhere, sort of, for instance, worked within the regime of Nazi Germany, or more specifically the SS, do you think everyone in that group could be constituted as evil?
No.
Why?
Because there are examples, rare examples of humanity. Wasn't there a guard at Auschwitz who actually fell in love with a Jewish prisoner?
It wouldn't surprise me.
In Canada.
Yeah, that would.
There's all kinds of different differences. There were Otto Horn in Treblinka, who worked in the Totenlager, the death camp, in the gas chambers. The few that survived bore witness that he was a good man. That he didn't mistreat the prisoners. He was doing a job. So I think he was found not guilty. And then there were people like Kurt Franz, or Auguste Mitier. I'm mispronouncing that. Miete, perhaps. Miete. Monsters. And actually actively enjoyed their power over their power to murder and kill and all kinds of horrors, commit all kinds of horrors. And then you have the commandant, who fascinates me because he was the only one who spoke about it, quite honestly. So much so that his last interview, 12 hours later, he was dead, where he admitted that he should never have left that place. His life should have ended there. And in that moment, he caught a glimpse of the man he could have been. But the question is, that I've had to ask myself, Globlochnik turned around in Lublin, and when he tried to get out of it and say, because he was originally at Sobibor, they didn't tell him what it was, and then he found the gas chamber and said this is like at Hartheim, where he'd worked in the euthanasia program. He was a policeman, a provincial policeman. And then he was taken to Treblinka. And Globlochnik named his 3 daughters as he was asking to be transferred to the Russian front, and said to him, I'm not making excuses for him, this is why it's so fascinating, this particular character, that all he had to do was make the trains run on time, the next 20 wagons. And he had to do it, it's a terrible thing to say, decently. It had to be efficient. Yeah. And with that wonderful German, he was Austrian, but that wonderful Anschluss efficiency, he made the trains run on time. He became efficient. And whatever happened, he turned a blind eye to that. He took a bottle of brandy to bed at night. Now, that's conscience.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. But they said he wore a white tunic. And they called him Der Weißen Tod, the White Death. It's a horrible, like Kurt Franz was Lalka, which is the doll, because he was a handsome man, preening in his uniform, kill him, that sort of thing. Lalka. And Stangl, he made it efficient, and the prisoners said, the survivors said, I didn't see him lay a hand on a prisoner. And he testified, I never touched anybody. And then he said, in a monotone, they became cargo. I didn't look at them as human beings. There was just a mass of flesh. And he would, and of course he wore the white uniform to keep the flies away, because the place stank. Mm. You could smell it for miles and miles around, especially when they started cremating the bodies. You see in Shoah, the farmers, they were tending their land right up to the gate. Of course, if they looked too closely, the Ukrainians would shoot at them. Ukrainians.
Let's touch on.
It's a huge subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be specific, and that's a very interesting point we made, and then went on to something else. Yes, it was banal to them. Killing became banal to them. That's perhaps what she means. I didn't think perhaps of
that. Yeah, I would wage as much.
Because that's one point. But banality of evil, I'm uncomfortable with the phrase because evil is rarely banal. So it's two different perspectives. If you're there and you become used to shooting somebody because you've done it 1,000 times, you performed a play 100 times. I've done it, in front of 1,000 people and in the West End, and suddenly I'm thinking, I wonder what I'm going to have for dinner. And you're in the middle of, it becomes automatic.
Yeah, where to, at
very
one
unprofessional, that, for me to admit.
At one point, you would have been potentially a bag of nerves, or I certainly would have been, and eventually, as you say, you get to that point where it is just second nature.